Downstairs? Can we begin? Welcome to the Everett Jewish Life Center in Chautauqua. I'm Linda Perlis. I'm a member of the program committee of the center. You'll see other people with these name tags. You can approach any of us and ask about Everett, or just volunteer. That would be even better. We're glad to have you here. Everett Center is a Jewish house on the Chautauqua campus. We explore Jewish food, music, politics, anti-Semitism, history, literature, comedy, on and on and on. Here, we provide an opportunity to learn, debate, laugh, and explore our interests together. At a time when anti-Semitism is on the rise and Jews are feeling vulnerable, the Everett Center provides a venue for Jews and the larger community to examine some of the very important issues affecting the Jewish community. This is the 16th year for the Everett Center. It was built through a generous donation by Edith Everett and her family in memory of her husband, Henry. They came for about 30 years in enjoying Chautauqua, and she was here earlier this season. I wasn't here yet, so I didn't see her, but she comes every year. It was Edith's vision to create a Jewish denominational house with outstanding programs, all free of charge, and also where there would be rooms available for guests to stay, and they're nice. We're proud that we have a very committed audience, and it continues to grow in numbers. Are there people here for the very first time? Welcome. Oh, we're so glad you're here. Glad you discovered Everett. Our programs include 2 talks every week and Jewish-themed films on Sunday and Wednesday. If you didn't see the film on Sunday about the Catskills, I urge you to come tomorrow to see it. As somebody who'd never been to the Catskills and I didn't have any New York family, it was a real education for me. Our program also includes 2 talks every week, and we have speakers like our guest Mona Charen, who bring us issues to think about and explore. Our programming and all the operations here are fully dependent on your donations. Edith gave us this wonderful building. You can explore all over it and all that's in it, and it's up to us to take care of it and run it. So that's what we do with the donations. There's a box out in the lobby. You can pick up these envelopes, and tax deductible donation will be helpful. So will volunteering. Please silence all cell phones and anything else electrical or noise making that you have with you. I'm going to introduce to you Mona Charen. Mona is a syndicated columnist and author. She's policy editor of The Bulwark, host of the weekly podcast Beg to Differ, and co-host of the Just Between Us podcast. She is a contributor to Time magazine and a regular commentator on BBC, a graduate of Columbia University and the George Washington University Law School. Ms. Charen began her career at the National Review magazine. She served as Nancy Reagan's speechwriter and later as Associate Director of the Office of Public Liaison. Later, in her White House career, she worked in the Public Affairs Office helping to craft President Reagan's communications strategy. In 1986, Ms. Charen joined the presidential campaign of then Congressman Jack Kemp. My children grew up with the Kemp's children, so we knew them well. Ms. Charen launched her syndicated column in 1987. It is featured in more than 60 newspapers and websites. She spent 6 years as a regular commentator on CNN's Capital Gang and Capital Gang Sunday, and has served as a judge for the Pulitzer Prizes. She's author of 4 books, wonderful titles: Useful Idiots, Do-Gooders, Sex Matters, and Hard Right. In 2010, she received the Eric Brendel Award for Excellence in Opinion Journalism. Today, Mona Charen will speak with us. Did Trump Kill Conservatism? Is the title of her talk. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here, and I'd like to thank again the Everett Jewish Life Center for inviting us. This is our first time at Chautauqua, and this is quite a phenomenon. I don't know that there's any other place in the United States and maybe the world to equal it. It's a combination of the arts and religion and literature and poetry and just great ideas. I mean, it is, and plus the beauty, the physical beauty of the environment is just, it's blown us away. So thank you for letting us discover what you all obviously know about. Well, I don't know how many of you watched the Republican National Convention a couple of weeks ago. I confess that I didn't watch very much of it, partly because I had COVID and I just needed to sleep, but partly because it was too depressing to watch the full flowering of nutjobbery, clownishness, dictator fandom, and false piety that the GOP has become. It was phony preachers side by side with soft porn stars and quasi-fascist speeches from the likes of Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin's best American pal. The bread and circuses element, of course, is the special sauce of Donald J. Trump, who has managed to turn the party of Lincoln into the party of tabloid TV. If you had come to me in 2012 and said that 2 of the warm-up speakers for the Republican nominee in 2024 would be Hulk Hogan and Dana White, I would have thought that was a bad joke. But actually, I wouldn't have even known who Dana White was. I had to look it up this year. So yeah, he's a promoter of wrestling. So great, that belongs at the GOP. But you know, it is a bad joke because even now, even with the switch of Kamala Harris for Joe Biden, Trump still remains by a hair ahead in the race. Now, I regard this as a potential disaster for the country, and I'll try to make clear in the comments that follow that this is not the triumph of conservatism. This is its very opposite. As someone who was part of the conservative movement for decades before heading into a self-imposed exile in 2016, although there were a lot of people pushing me, I must confess, I'd like to offer a view on what I conceive conservatism to be and why the Republican Party, and particularly the MAGA movement, do not represent it and in fact betray its principles. There are many aspects of the conservative perspective that remain valuable, but today no American political party speaks for it. We have one center-left party in the Democrats, and we have one populist nationalist party in the Republicans. There is no longer a conservative party. Well, it's been said that liberals worship the future and conservatives worship the past. I must confess I've always had a weakness for the aphorism from the poet Robert Frost, who said, "A liberal is a man too broad-minded to take his own side in a quarrel." And while that may seem unduly cruel, let me quickly counter it with a quote from Leo Roston, who said, "A conservative is one who admires radicals centuries after they're dead." Conservatives, I would submit, at their best, are modest about their own knowledge and apt to think that if something has been done a certain way for a very long time, there might be a good reason for it. G.K. Chesterton penned a famous formulation of this insight. He said, "Don't tear down a fence until you know why it was put up in the first place." Progressives might counter that not all traditions are virtuous, and of course they have a point. People beat their children for centuries, they engaged in slavery and conquest and racial discrimination, committed countless other sins. So we can't just reflexively defend everything that we have inherited. Progress requires recognizing our errors and flaws. Conservatives understand this. What conservatism counsels is caution and gradualism. And frankly, the give and take between liberals and conservatives, between reformers and traditionalists, is healthy in any society. Trying to get along without both is like trying to fly a plane with just one wing. But in answer to those who object that we cannot be guided by the past because it's so drenched in mistakes and horrors, I would invoke the conservative virtue of prudence. Of course, the past is full of errors. It's also full of wisdom born of experience. A prudent reformer will carefully consider the trade-offs, bearing in mind that it's much easier to tear down than to build up. Something that took decades or centuries to mature can be destroyed in very short order. And then I want to make a distinction between conservatism that we see around the world, conservatism specifically in Europe, and American conservatism. Our conservatism is conserving small L liberalism. That is, it conserves the liberal ideals of the Enlightenment that were codified in our Declaration and our Constitution. Now, our founding is built, in my opinion, on a conservative view of human nature, that is, unsentimental. Here's James Madison's formulation in Federalist 10. I note Kate Shaw was using this yesterday in her talk, but it's so relevant to so many topics. He said, pardon me, "But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." So American conservatism, unlike Europe, is not about thrones and altars. The founders, aware of the pitfalls of other democracies, designed a system to give the people power to govern themselves and also, crucially, to protect the rights of individuals and of minorities. Direct democracies, as opposed to republics, have proven to be unstable and do not protect minorities. Our founders designed a system that protected individuals from overweening state power, but permitted change if there was broad consensus, as when we amend the Constitution. Good argument that it's actually too difficult to amend the Constitution, and I would be for a constitutional amendment that made amending the Constitution a little easier, but in any event, it was understood that it could grow and change. And as everyone knows, they created the lower house, elected every 2 years to be closely attuned to the people's wishes, and an upper house elected every 6 years that would be a bit more detached and capable of calm reflection. They gave the president a veto and the Congress, with a supermajority, the power to override a veto. And they created a federal system with room for different regions to govern themselves in their own ways within the contours of constitutional rights. Above all, they enumerated in the Bill of Rights the rights that Congress may not and the president may not take away from the American people. So, I believe that to be an American conservative is to be about conserving those ideas and ideals, liberty, limits on government power, equality under the law, and the pursuit of happiness. So why do I say that MAGA has turned its back on conservatism? Where to begin? All right, reason number one. One of Trump's earliest boasts, going back to 2016, was, "I alone can fix it." Conservatism is allergic to that kind of talk because it implies both an authoritarian mindset and a misunderstanding of how things must work in our democracy. We have procedures, laws, and rules. We have the Constitution I was just praising. That Constitution purposely makes it difficult to enact laws. We make changes through persuasion and joint effort, not by executive fiat. We fought a revolution because we were not content to be governed by a king. After 235 years of republicanism, small r, we will not trade it in for King Donald I. In addition to that, conservatives in the past have tended to be highly suspicious of government power in general and particularly leery of would-be autocrats. That is antithetical to the conservative sensibility. Now, some of us in the pre-Trump era, what we sometimes call the before times, protested when President Barack Obama made changes to immigration law by executive action, exactly because we said procedures matter, law matters. Trump, of course, took it to a whole new level, swatting away inconvenient laws like mosquitoes. Number two, another conservative fundamental that Trump rejected was the traditional GOP view on fiscal responsibility. Trump promised never to reform entitlements, even while, absurdly, claiming that he would also cut taxes and balance the federal budget in 8 years. In fact, in his one term, God willing, he increased the deficit by $7.8 trillion, most of that accumulated before COVID. Conservatives have traditionally given at least lip service to the idea that government cannot endlessly accumulate debt. And though it's true that sometimes the execution left a lot to be desired, the fact that both parties now blithely run up debt is a sign of gross irresponsibility. Number three, in contrast to the welcoming posture of the GOP over many decades, Trump completely flipped the script on immigration. He didn't just advocate for tighter border security to prevent illegal immigrants from crossing. He demonized all immigrants, legal and illegal, and in repellent and false terms as drug dealers and rapists. Contrast that with the words of George W. Bush, who in 2011 had this to say about immigrants. He said, "Not only do immigrants help the economy, they invigorate our soul." Number four, trade. Trump's rejection of trade flies in the face of conservative orthodoxy. Conservatives have traditionally believed in free enterprise as the royal road to prosperity, and that includes free markets at home and the freest possible international trade. In the post-war era, American international leadership on trade, pursued by both political parties, allowed hundreds of millions of people to prosper, but none more than here in the United States. MAGA's embrace of tariffs is a drastic mistake, one, unfortunately, that was repeated by the Biden administration. All right, those are four fairly tame policy matters in which MAGA republicanism departs from traditional conservatism. So on presidential power, on fiscal responsibility, on immigration, and on trade. So those are serious matters in and of themselves and would be enough to give conservatives pause, one would think. But now I would like to turn to the aspects of MAGA that are not just of concern, they are 5-alarm fires. Number 5, Opposition to dictatorship and dictators runs deep in the conservative psyche, but not in Trump and not in his movement. In his convention acceptance speech, he praised Hungary's strongman leader, Viktor Orban, not for the first time. He gave him the best Trumpian praise. He called him a very, very tough guy. This is not new. Trump has praised Orban frequently, despite the fact that Orban is very close to Putin and Xi Jinping, and has curtailed press freedom and the independent judiciary in Hungary, plus rigging the election system. Trump's admiration for Putin is well known, and his preferences have infected the Republican Party, which has transformed from an anti-authoritarian bulwark into, at least in some areas, an arm of Russian propaganda. Tucker Carlson, as I mentioned, is Putin's most prominent cheerleader, and right behind him in Putin admiration are leading GOP figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. Liz Cheney calls them the Putin wing of the GOP, and they now comprise about half the Republican conference in the House of Representatives. They oppose aid to Ukraine and repeat Kremlin talking points about Zelensky's wife buying yachts and the supposed Nazi sympathizers of Ukrainian leadership, two of whom at least happen to be Jewish. Trump's attraction to dictators, of course, goes well beyond Putin. He often expressed his admiration for Kim Jong-un. He said he had wonderful control over his people, and he fantasized about having the same kind of control over his people. He praised the strength of Xi Jinping as recently as a week ago, raving to a rally that, quote, he's talking about Xi Jinping, he controls 1.4 billion people with an iron fist. Now, what kind of American leader talks about that as a point of admiration? On another occasion, he expressed his admiration for Xi Jinping in almost schoolgirl crush tones, saying, oh, he's from central casting. And he's a very smart person, very smart. So the GOP is now a party that admires the iron fist leadership of a communist dictator, but labels any American who favors expanding Obamacare as a Marxist. The MAGA foreign policy is unlike anything that I have seen in my lifetime. Trump has only contempt for our Democratic allies, whom he perceives to be nothing but freeloaders, and is full of admiration for the enemies we are supposedly allied against. John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, has written that Trump has vowed to pull out of NATO entirely if he gets another term. And Trump's praise of foreign leaders, Putin, Xi, Duterte, Orban, is always about toughness, never for sharing democratic values. There is that whiff of fascism. And if that were not enough, in one of his more deranged rants from his Mar-a-Lago exile in 2021, he posted on Truth Social that the Constitution itself would have to be terminated to reinstall him to the presidency. Number 6. Trump has consistently invited political violence since he debuted on the national stage. From the earliest rallies in 2015, in which he urged his followers to beat the out of protesters, promising that he would pay their legal bills, to chuckling appreciatively when one rally goer in Florida yelled that immigrants should be shot. And Trump grinned and said, you can only say that in the panhandle. During the 2016 campaign, he insinuated that gun owners might want to protest gun control violently, saying that Hillary Clinton, if elected, would take away guns, which is of course false. And he said, if she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. When the nation was under stress during COVID and armed groups were protesting at state capitals, Trump tweeted messages like, "Liberate Michigan," and "Liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege." Again, that is false. During COVID, there was no push for gun control. Trump was simply using this to incite his most rabid and armed fans. When word came of a plot to kidnap and kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Trump was dismissive. He was speaking to a group in Michigan. He said, "Your governor, I don't think she likes me too much." And he prompted a loud reaction from the crowd. And then he said, "I'm the one. It was our people that helped her out with her problem. I mean, we'll have to see if it's a problem, right? People are entitled to say maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't." When Nancy Pelosi's husband was brutally assaulted by a hammer-wielding intruder, Trump mocked both of them and joined in the slander, circulated by his son, that the attack was actually a sexual tryst gone wrong. And it need hardly be added, Trump invited a mob to Washington on January 6th, incited them to attack the Capitol, and stood by for hours as they smashed the heads of police, destroyed property, disrupted the proceedings, made members and staff fear for their lives, hunted for Pelosi and Pence, and desecrated the temple of democracy. In the years that followed, he has glorified the perpetrators, calling them political prisoners and hostages, and vowed to pardon them if reelected. Number 7, intimidation. Among the many betrayals of conservative and quite simply American principles that the MAGA movement is guilty of is bringing mob-like tactics into government. Like a mafia boss, Trump has demanded personal loyalty from officers of the United States. It's what he did with the FBI director, James Comey, and what he repeated with countless others. When an official particularly irks him, Trump frequently responds with the charge of treason. Now, treason is the only crime that is defined in the United States Constitution. There's a reason for that. The founders knew all about monarchies in which treason was defined broadly as any action opposing the king, or sometimes even criticizing the king. So, in Article 3, Section 3, it states specifically, "Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort." Before the Civil War, the United States was always referred to in the plural, not the singular. But Trump accuses mere critics of treason on a regular basis. He accused his own former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, after Milley gave an interview to The Atlantic that Trump found annoying. On Truth Social, he suggested that Milley was surreptitiously dealing with China. Quote, "This is an act so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death." Oh, and so he goes on. On at least 24 occasions, the former president has accused critics of treason. They range from Peter Strzok, the FBI official whose offense was exchanging worried texts with his lover, to the then anonymous administration official who penned a New York Times op-ed saying that many insiders in Trump world were aware of his unfitness. And also he used treason, he used the accusation against Democrats who declined to applaud during one of his State of the Union addresses. So yeah, these examples sound like something out of Idiocracy, but millions of Americans take Trump, contra Selena Zito, they take him literally and seriously. Let me grab some water. How does this work? I can always unscrew it, right? Well, when in doubt, do it the old-fashioned way. I'm a conservative after all. Now, when Trump muses on social media about some opponent who merits the death penalty, he knows what he's doing. He knows full well that some of his more rabid followers may interpret this as an invitation to assassination, just as the January 6th crowd chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." That thuggishness, that play of the finger near the trigger, places Trump in a category all his own in American politics. The stench of political violence has attached to Trump from the start. In 2016, when his critics were being bombarded by violent anti-Semitic and other abuse on Twitter, Trump did nothing to discourage it. Invited by CNN's Jake Tapper to denounce the KKK, he declined. Every American should have recognized at that moment that we were dealing with something sinister. At his rallies, he reveled in violent fantasies of roughing up protesters and killing not just terrorists, but the children of terrorists. That summer, when talk circulated of a convention floor fight, this was 2016, Trump consigliere Roger Stone warned that the Trump team had plans in place in case delegates proved independent-minded. Quote, "We will disclose the hotel and room numbers of those delegates who are directly involved in the steal. We urge you to visit their hotel and find them." Not subtle. Threaten them with the mob. The Trump method was evident then, and for historians of the big lie, we might want to also note that Stone further elaborated on Trump's theory of the nomination fight. Again, this is 2016. This is Stone. He said, "It's interesting to me that in every primary or caucus where Ted Cruz won, we have certified, proven, sworn evidence of massive voter fraud, which will later be presented to the Credentials Committee in Cleveland in an attempt to unseat delegates who were illegally elected." Certified, proven, sworn evidence. Sounds familiar. The same damnable lies that destroyed faith in our democracy among tens of millions of Americans when they were repeated nearly verbatim 4 years later. In 2016, it only required political courage to stand against Trump. But by 2020, due to the decay of decency in the GOP, it required physical courage too. If some critical mass of Republicans had demonstrated the requisite political courage in 2016, it would never have come to this, that in the United States, political and other figures must think about their physical safety before deciding how to speak or vote. As McKay Coppins recounted in his biography of Mitt Romney, by the time the Senate was considering whether to impeach Trump a second time for the January 6th insurrection, fear had become a handmaiden to Republican office holders. In 2016, Trump's bullying and Stone's veiled threats were shrugged off. In 2021, after witnessing January 6th, the hammer attack on Paul Pelosi, the swarm of screaming Trump supporters who surrounded Lindsey Graham in an airport after he criticized Trump, and so much more, wavering senators who were considering voting to convict Trump were warned by others to, quote, "think of your personal security, think of your children." And so they cowered and failed to cast votes that would have rid our politics of Trump forever. Romney himself has been the focus of so many credible threats that he had to spend $5,000 a day since the impeachment vote on security for himself and his family. The MAGA Republican Party is less like the party that nominated Romney than it is like the party that nominated Erdogan in Turkey. And it's a mistake, in my judgment, to minimize the role that fear now plays in assisting and enabling Trump's continued dominance. Romney is hardly alone among members of Congress in worrying about personal security. In the first year of Trump's tenure, threats against members of Congress quadrupled from fewer than 900 to 3,900. Threats continued to rise throughout the Trump presidency, more than doubling by 2020. After January 6th, the Capitol Police estimated that there were 10,000 threats of violence or death against members. These members see their constituents on a regular basis. They do town halls, they go to church breakfasts and ribbon cuttings. They are at far higher risk from a stray gunman than journalists and others who routinely receive threats. As we saw, even Trump himself is not immune from the threat of violence. Liz Cheney displayed inspiring courage during the House January 6th committee hearings, and history will doubtless credit her, but her constituents did not. During the 2022 campaign, out of concern for her safety in Wyoming, she stopped doing all town halls and other public engagements. She didn't dare. It isn't just members of Congress. The sense of menace has invaded every level of American politics. Threats against judges, threats against election workers, threats against prosecutors. A survey of mayors found that 1 in 3 had considered resigning due to death threats, and 70% reported knowing someone who chose not to run for office out of fear for their personal security. Among election workers nationwide, those wonderful people who sit at the counter when you show up to vote and check your ID and wish you well and make sure that everything runs smoothly, these wonderful volunteers, sort of the backbone of American democracy, 20% said that they knew someone who would no longer participate due to threats, and 73% said threats and harassment had increased in the last few years. We cannot have a viable political system that relies just on extraordinarily brave people, because there aren't enough of them. A man armed with multiple firearms was arrested outside former President Obama's Washington, D.C. home last year. A participant in the January 6th insurrection, he had learned of Obama's home address from a Trump Truth Social tweet. He told his YouTube audience that he was looking for a good angle on a shot. In any other time or place, the fact that Trump facilitated an attack on a former president by publishing his home address would have dominated the news for days or weeks. It was barely a blip in our time. Another gunman was apprehended near the home of Justice Kavanaugh in 2022. He was carrying burglary tools, a knife, pepper spray, and a handgun. Following the search of Mar-a-Lago, the FBI needed to increase security for the FBI. Today, everyone associated with the Trump trials, Judge Tanya Chutkan, Jack Smith, Fani Willis, all of them need 24/7 security. This level of intimidation is new. I mean, political violence, sadly, is not new in the United States, but in recent times, it had been in abeyance. So it can be countered with coordinated action by law enforcement, media, the courts, and the public, but only if we recognize the nature of what we're dealing with. Our elaborate government and society were designed over centuries to prevent rule by fear and violence. But those ancient foes are very much alive in the MAGA GOP and cannot be wished away. Number 8, racism. Now, no American political party is pure on the subject of race. But under Trump, the GOP has begun to traffic in the kinds of racist imagery and tone that one would have thought was relegated to the rearview mirror. Trump rose to leadership by falsely impugning the citizenship of Barack Obama, an accusation he later leveled against Kamala Harris as well. In 2016, he said that the judge in the Trump University case could not be fair because he was a Mexican, which at the time, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan described as textbook racism. He picked fights with African American political figures, judges, prosecutors, always accusing them of racism. I have yet to hear Trump accuse a single white person of racism. Up until the time he was banned from Twitter, he retweeted racist images such as the one showing Hillary Clinton with a Star of David and a pile of money. After Charlottesville, he said there were good people on both sides. Throughout the post-election period in 2020, Trump and Rudy Giuliani made frankly racist assertions that election workers Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman had engaged in fraud. Giuliani said, and Trump repeated, that they were exchanging something that looked like vials of heroin or cocaine. It was a package of breath mints. Some on the left say that the GOP has always been racist and that Trump simply let the mask fall. I can only report that while, as I say, no political party in American history is pure, I believe the GOP had mostly transcended that history when I was coming of age. Here is how previous Republican leaders from my growing up time spoke about racism. Here was Ronald Reagan speaking to the NAACP. He said, "A few isolated groups in the back order of American life still hold perverted notions of what America is all about. Recently, in some places in the nation, there's been a disturbing reoccurrence of bigotry and violence. To those individuals who persist in such hateful behavior, you are the ones who are out of step with our society. You are the ones who willfully violate the meaning of the dream that is America, and this country, because it does, who violate the meaning of the dream that is America and this country, because it does what it stands for and will not stand for your conduct." In 1991, when former Klansman David Duke won the Republican nomination for governor of Louisiana, he was disowned by the national GOP, and President George H.W. Bush denounced him from the White House, saying, "When someone asserts the Holocaust never took place, then I don't believe that person ever deserves one iota of public trust. When someone has so recently endorsed Nazism, it is inconceivable that someone can reasonably aspire to leadership in a free society." Well, Duke was running against Edward Edwards, who was accused of corruption, and not without reason. He later served 8 years for racketeering. But the race did give rise to a memorable bumper sticker. It said, "Vote for the crook, it's important." In 1996, accepting the Republican nomination for president, Bob Dole said this, "If there is anyone who has mistakenly attached themselves to our party in the belief that we're not open to citizens of every race and religion, then let me remind you, tonight, this hall belongs to the party of Lincoln, and the exits, which are clearly marked, are for you to walk out of as I stand this ground without compromise." George W. Bush didn't attempt to sugarcoat the uglier sides of American history. In 2000, he said, "For our nation, there is no denying the truth that slavery is a blight on our history and that racism, despite all the progress, still exists today. For my party, there is no escaping the reality that the party of Lincoln has not always carried the mantle of Lincoln." And so that is the history of rejecting racism that was the best of the Republican Party, and it is really tragic that the modern MAGA GOP has retreated from it. Number 9, lying. The GOP has become the party of gaslighting, of alternate facts, and of pernicious lies. No good government is possible. No civil peace is sustainable when we cannot agree on basic facts. Liars are unworthy of respect. Some of us cautioned about Trump's dishonesty back in 2015, and in the intervening years, lying has become a way of life for the whole party he leads and has brought us to the point where 80% of Republicans believe the devastating and destabilizing lie that the 2020 election was stolen. It is part of our heritage to value the truth. Carved into the mantle of the East Room in the White House, and I was fortunate enough to see this many times when I worked in the White House, is a benediction from our second president, John Adams. When he first moved into the White House, he said this in a letter to Abigail, and it is now inscribed in the mantelpiece. Quote, "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." Number 10, the cruelty, vulgarity, and stupidity of the modern right repels me. This is a group that makes room for Laura Loomer and Alex Jones and Jack Posobiec. You may not know who that is. He is the originator of the Pizzagate conspiracy. But it pushes out Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, and Adam Kinzinger. QAnon is welcome, but Reaganism is called a zombie philosophy. It is a cult, not a political party. All right. After a catalog like that, you may be wondering, how can I say that there are still valuable conservative insights? So I say it because conservatism is a disposition. It is not a political party. If American politics ever serves up a new party open to conservatism, I think it would do well to focus on the importance of incentives, not just motives. So progressive, I think, tend to think in terms of motives. Rents are high, it must be because landlords are greedy, and therefore, let's impose rent control. President Biden has fallen into this trap. He just proposed nationwide rent control a couple weeks ago. Well, conservatives would reply that rent control creates perverse incentives. Yes, a few people who get rent-controlled apartments definitely benefit, but study after study has shown all across the world that rent control also decreases the number of units available because landlords have little incentive to build new housing. It also causes existing housing stock to decay. For the same reason, landlords have less incentive to keep their buildings in good shape. Rent control also contributes to political corruption because every municipality or state that has imposed rent control has also permitted exceptions or carve-outs, and that in turn incentivizes developers and others to make contributions to politicians to get those carve-outs. Another example of the conservative sensibility. Think about education. Few things are more important in any society than educating the young. And yet in our country, few realms have been more distorted by fads and wishful thinking than education. For decades, the education establishment embraced whole language and other alternatives to phonics when it came to teaching kids to read. And for decades, conservatives objected that these fads don't work. And they further noted that the kids who suffer the most from poor teaching techniques were poor students or those learning English as a second language. Conservatives were dubious that learning to read was as natural as learning to speak, which is what the reformers were suggesting. Time has ratified this insight. Here is a headline I will offer you from a 2023 New York Times story. Quote, "Kids can't read. The revolt that is taking on the education establishment." And it went on to document the number of states that have reversed their policies and are now adopting phonics education. And the kids are making rapid progress, not just in reading, but in math too. Because apparently, when you increase kids' confidence that they can read, it has more generalized effects on learning in general. Another area that cries out for some conservatism right now is the stampede to treat children with gender dysphoria according only to the affirmation model, which includes changing a child's name and pronouns, allowing the child to socially transition to the other sex, prescribing puberty blockers for some period of years, and then moving on to cross-sex hormones and surgery. Now, there's little doubt that for some percentage of children, this may be the way to go. There are children who are genuinely, who would genuinely lead a happier life if they transition to the other sex. But there has been a huge embrace of this uncritically in the United States. And it's very interesting to see that in Europe and Great Britain, their health establishments have backed away from the affirmation model, noting that the research does not support this extremely radical approach. But in the US, it remains extremely controversial, even to suggest caution. There are leading therapists who treat gender dysphoric children, some of whom are trans adults themselves, who've warned that children are being put on puberty blockers before getting a thorough evaluation. A large percent of children who present with gender dysphoria also have other mental health challenges like autism, depression, and anxiety. Teasing apart what's really going on is the job of a competent professional. But in a politicized atmosphere in which these issues are being treated more as matters of social justice than of medicine, it becomes harder and harder for therapists to put the brakes on. Trade. I remain a passionate believer in free trade, but on this issue, both Democrats and Republicans have unfortunately retreated into protectionism. This has the potential for disastrous consequences. We know from looking back at the history of the 1930s that the Smoot-Hawley tariff deepened and extended the depression in the United States and spread it around the world. And when we impose tariffs, of course, our trading partners retaliate. And so what you get is less wealth for everyone. It's beggar thy neighbor, but it beggars yourself too. So, to sum up, I love the conservative virtues of prudence, caution, courtesy, adherence to American law and tradition. Those are the conservative values I'd love to see reified in a political party. In the era of Trump and Tucker Carlson and J.D. Vance, I may have a long wait, but I will keep the flag aloft because good ideas are never dead. They remain a treasure to be rediscovered. Thank you.
If you have a question, please go to the microphone at the far side so that the people outside can hear you.
It's mine, it's mine. It's right here.
Hold it close if you would. She's coming right back.
Oh, okay.
Hold the microphone very close if you would.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for it.
My pleasure.
Should I start? Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Mona. This was terrific, and for many of us that are terrified of what's ahead of us, I fear it doesn't reduce the terror. But thank you for setting it out so convincingly. Quick question. Among other figures you mentioned, 80% of Republicans, you indicated, endorse the lie. That's a lot of people. And my question is, given the numbers we're talking about, 80% of the Republican Party, how can there be any hope that we'll ever get back to a two-party system?
Well, here's where a little bit of a long view, I guess, is necessary. There were people who believed a lot of very pernicious things in the past in our history. You had racism that was pervasive in America. Those views changed. People can change their ideas with time, and nothing is forever. I mean, and that is a comfort.
That was an excellent presentation.
Thank
And
you.
having grown up in New York City with the Trump family, he was indeed convicted by a jury of his peers, but that's another lie. You did not mention the Supreme Court. And I want to follow up on something yesterday where the speaker talked about a variety of things that could be done. But what she did not mention, I want you to comment on the court, which is not really conservative based on your presentation, but there is nothing in the Constitution that gives the Supreme Court the right to review. That is Marbury versus Madison. And with what's going on in the court, what would happen, in your opinion, if a state just decided to ignore a pronouncement of the Supreme Court in an area like abortion that they consider a constitutional right to their citizens? So if you wouldn't mind commenting on those.
I'll answer the second part first. States do have the right under Dobbs to legislate as they see fit on abortion. And there are many states in the wake of Dobbs, actually, who have even liberalized their laws on abortion. So that, I think, is set. I also attended the lecture by Kate Shaw yesterday. I thought it was excellent. The court is worrisome, actually, because I felt, I was, so I don't agree with Kate Shaw on everything. I was actually for the decision overruling the Chevron deference, but on presidential immunity, I felt that that was so beyond the pale, such a departure from what the Constitution says, and I found it really sort of gobsmacking that conservative justices who say that they are textualists, originalists, and that they base their rulings on history and tradition would rule in such a way that was, as she said, so consequentialist. In other words, it wasn't based on what was the text of the Constitution, because the text of the Constitution clearly contemplates that a president can be prosecuted after leaving office after impeachment. And so I found it shocking that the court ruled the way it did. I don't know why the conservative majority seemed so worried about the prospect of, out of control prosecutors going after ex-presidents when in 235 years of American history it has never happened until Trump. And yet they seemed remarkably unworried about Trump's potential use of this purported immunity to commit further crimes. I found it an inexplicable decision.
As a true conservative, you and your friends and your fellow conservatives must have a huge dilemma with the election coming up. What are you going to do?
So I suppose it's a dilemma for some people. My friend Brett Stevens is struggling with this, even in print. It isn't a struggle for me, I have to say, because, look, in an ideal world, would I choose Kamala Harris as my candidate? I would not. She's well to the left of me on many issues. But for me, the overriding thing is to keep Trump from power again. I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about the health of the republic if Kamala Harris is elected. I may disagree with her, and I'll do so vociferously, but I'll still have the right to do it.
Thank you so much for all of your comments. And this is not a question. This is just something that going through your 10 points, I was so moved, and I, just taking a deep breath. I'm a sexual assault survivor, and when you're, in hearing this list, this man is a predator. And I guess it's just confirmation that this is who he is, I believe, at his core. And that's what frightens me so much. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
In your list of the issues, of course, that are concerning racism, of course, came out very strong. Would you comment on Trump's popularity within sections of the black community in the face of his racist remarks?
Yeah, it's a little perplexing, but there are many cross currents in American life, and we have a very large number of African Americans. They are not a monolith. They think for themselves. It is notable that Trump's support was much higher among African American men than among African American women. And by the way, both have gone way down since Biden left the race, and Kamala Harris is the candidate. But I do think perhaps that I would point to the fact that inflation hit people very hard, and that may be part of it. And I would also note that this whole cult of masculinity that Trump has projected I think it's the wrong way. I'm all for masculinity, but not the way they're presenting it. And I think, though, that it may appeal to a certain kind of black and Hispanic male who feel disrespected by sort of the feminist, very, sort of, the people on the progressive side of the Democratic Party who are always who never use the word masculinity without the prefix toxic. And so I think that may be part of what we're seeing there.
I was very taken by the fact that you quoted one of my favorites, G.K. Chesterton. So there's a relevant quotation here, and I'd love to hear you address this. He said, "The business of progressives is to go on making mistakes. The business of conservatives is to prevent mistakes from being corrected."
That's pretty wonderful. I'll see you and raise you one. I have one from, this is not Chesterton, this is Ambrose Bierce in his famous Devil's Dictionary. And let's see, he said, a statesman, he said a conservative is a statesman who is enamored of existing evils, as distinguished from the liberal, who wishes to replace them with others.
You mentioned the two-party system and not having a third, but there was a conservative party in New York State many, many years ago.
Yep.
And sometimes they would unite with the Republicans and they would nominate the conservative. Is there not a place for that in America now?
Yeah, so actually New York, as I understand it, has 4 political parties. They also have a liberal party. So some friends of mine at the Cato Institute are right now investigating fusion voting, and that is part of it. I am not an expert on it, but I am very interested in finding out more about it, and I am also very interested in Final Four voting, which is ranked choice, and so that you don't allow the extremes of both parties who vote in primaries to present then the general election electorate with a choice that people in the middle don't like. So I do think that reforming our electoral system and how we choose candidates is very, very important going forward.
Just a couple of quick more questions. We can't stay much longer.
Thank you very much. Your comments were
Bring the microphone up so we can.
your comments were very poignant. Why is the 10 points not more articulated by the press more forcefully than it is being now?
Well, I think the press is kind of overwhelmed in the Trump era. It's just a fire hose of outrages, and they haven't figured out a way to focus attention on what they want to focus attention on rather than the latest outrage. It's a fascinating technique that people in the future will look back on and say was actually a little bit of a stroke of genius on Trump's part, which was he figured out how you can say the worst things and get away with it by saying something even worse the next day.
I was just going to say, first of all, lifelong Democrat here, but so I understand some of the issues that people grapple with and why Trump is as popular as he is. I mean, I know a lot of people worry about immigration, which you didn't mention, the border. With the tariffs, in the past, like I remember when made in Japan was a slur, but I mean, I don't think we are really prepared to deal with a competitor like China, which has just like flooded us with their goods that are, some of them are produced by slave labor. And then I guess there's another issue, maybe some people in this room, there's kind of Israel. So I think people, I mean, Trump is not reliable, as like Brett Stevens has said. I mean, just because he has been a friend to Israel in the past is no indication of what he will do. And he's said things pro and against Israel recently. But, I guess these are kind of issues why people might, not me, but might consider voting for the convicted rapist and felon and, like everything else you want, dictator, everything else you want to throw at him.
Right. Well, thanks for that. Look, I mean, I'll say this. It would be a mistake, and if I gave this impression, I hope I didn't. It would be a mistake to assume that every single voter in America who's planning to vote for Trump is a racist and is a xenophobe and is crude and vulgar and approves of sexual assault. Okay, that is absolutely not true. And there are many reasons that people support Trump. A lot of Trump supporters do not know a lot of the things that I just itemized because they get their news very curated from Fox and other places where they only get a particular image. And so it's always important to keep those lines of communication open to the degree we can, because right now we live in information silos. We only hear things we agree with most of the time. Very, very dangerous. And anything that we can do to increase communication across the political divide is going to help us heal some of these issues. Thanks.